welcome everybody. Great to see you all on another Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday morning drop-in session. Today's session, we're looking at customer onboarding, and this is essentially a follow-on, if you like, to last month's Scrum. I say last month, was it the beginning of this month? Anyway, our last Scrum event, where we were exploring onboarding processes. We were talking about customer onboarding as we were here, but very much in that event, really we were looking at any sort of onboarding. So whether it was customer onboarding, employee onboarding, supplier onboarding, we were talking about all of the things that you really need to think about and consider when you're establishing a new relationship with somebody that you're either doing business with or working with. So some really fascinating topics that we covered there, everything from some sort of real specific tactical stuff right through to some of the areas that I found really fascinating, which are around things like the cultural aspect of onboarding, say, customers that you're working with. Now, in this session today, it's going to be more of the sort of technical aspects of it in terms of how we might go about looking at this topic specifically within the Skore product itself. So you can see on the screen, I've got three sort of areas that I want to cover or explore today. So we're going to look at some of the benefits of mapping the onboarding process. Again, you can use this term onboarding fairly generically. I've tended to stick with customer onboarding here. Then I'm going to talk about some of the things to consider when we're looking at the onboarding process. I've got an example onboarding process, which I'll share and talk through some of those things. And then I just want to talk about some of the ideas and ways in which you can use Skore to understand, analyze, and improve the onboarding process. So hopefully there'll be sort of some things that you'll be familiar with in there, and there'll be some things that'll be potentially new certainly to some of you, I'm sure. So let's start with the top of the list there, benefits of mapping the onboarding process. Well, yeah, these are the pretty kind of common reasons that we'd be giving for any sort of work that you'd be doing within Skore. Now, the onboarding process is something that comes up an awful lot in the work that we do with different customers. Every business has some sort of onboarding process, as I was talking about before. So it's one that we see an awful lot, and they're all very, very different. But it always amazes me how often the onboarding process itself is a gap between the sales process and the delivery process within a lot of organizations. So sales process often finishes with some sort of contract signed, and then delivery starts with delivering the service. And the bit that happens in the middle, i.e., how do we take the customer from the sale being closed to actually getting them up and running in the service, is often just not made up, but the wheel is reinvented every single time, or more often than not. And in fact, on the example that I'm going to share in a second, that was very much the case with the client that inspired the example. Was that they had this situation where they had a number of clients with a financial services company, and they had some clients that were absolutely brilliant. They worked really, really well with, and some clients that just had a really constantly difficult relationship, which often ended in that client then moving on to a competitor. And they had an external consultant came in to look at why that was happening, why they had this variability, and it all came down to who was the person, the client manager, who was actually managing the client and onboarding them at the beginning. And it all came down to how they set that framework up at the beginning of the relationship. So standardizing how you do this is really important, because it really helps you understand what are the things that work, what are the things that you should remember each time. You're bringing people together to talk about, hey, look, over here we used this with this client, it worked really well. People who are maybe new to this can learn an awful lot. So going through that exercise of mapping the process and standardizing how you do the onboarding is really important, hence why I've got it top of the list here. But equally important, and again, one of the things that a lot of users of Skore value immensely, is the ability to be able to demonstrate to a customer or a prospect exactly what's going to happen when the sale closes. How is this going to work? And so having a documented process in an easy to read format allows you to be able to do that. Another one I think is really important is being able to demonstrate your expertise in this area as well. There's often, whatever the service is that you're delivering, there's often a lot more around it, how you implement it and how you use it, that often isn't directly involved in the service itself. And so being able to demonstrate some sort of expertise around that. In our case, for example, we provide a product that allows you to document, manage processes, but alongside that, we will provide advice and guidance on how to do certain types of process analysis. And then the last point I've got in here is once you've got a process, like any process, once you've documented a process, you've got your baseline, it gives you that ability to then review and improve it over time. So if you understand what the baseline is, you can start to understand what the changes and improvements need to be. And you can also start to understand where things have gone wrong and dig into why they've gone wrong. So doing things like root cause analysis. But hopefully these are all the sort of common things, basics that you'd all be familiar with in any sort of process type work. So what I'm going to do is go back up to the top. This time I'm going to say look at an example of an onboarding process. So the example, as I said, this has come from, or it's inspired by some work that we did with a customer in a financial services organization. This was also the basis for the template in our template library. So again, if you're not familiar with the template library in Skore, where when you're in Skore, where you've got the button that says new process, there's a button alongside that says access the template library, and it's called the Customer Onboarding Process in there if you want to go and take a look at it. Now, this, as I said, what was fascinating about this example is that they didn't have anything like this documented. I think what they had was a very basic checklist. It was in a Word document or a spreadsheet of some basic things they needed to capture with the client. But essentially what they were doing here was they were selling an outsourced service to the client. So often their clients would be doing this work today internally, but then they'd be handing it over to this company to do for them in the future. And of course, what that meant was it was not only still trying to understand what work moves from the customer into the outsource provider, but also what systems were they using, what sort of data did they have, all of that sort of thing. And so you can see here, it's a very high level process, but what you talk about is, first of all, it's agreeing what are the requirements with the customer. So there's going to be a standard set of requirements, but it's about digging into those to understand any of the details, the nuances and the changes and so on. Then what they would do is go through an initial setup, running some sort of test run, performing any training that was required. And then here we talk about updating the data. So essentially what they were doing is they were taking customer data, they were making sense of that data, they were reconfiguring it as necessary for the new systems that it was going to be run on. And then they were doing essentially a test, and you can see a sort of feedback loop here where that would keep going until they had it working in the right way. And then here at this update, this is essentially the data for your go live operations would be uploaded into the system, then provide some sort of high level support before handing over to a business as usual type operation. So just talk about some of the things that were really key to consider, that specific in this process, but in other onboarding processes as well. So really important for this one was the data, making sure they had the right data, and also understanding any sort of systems integration. So some of their clients had systems that they would connect to and others didn't, and they would provide data in various forms like spreadsheets and so on. So there was an awful lot of work had to be done just in terms of understanding what that data structure was and agreeing how it would be exchanged in future. Other really important things that that you should be considering at this point is, have you got all the right contact details? Often the different people in your organization who might be working with people in the client organization, you might have different contact details. So the people involved in the sales cycle may be different than those working in BAU. And often in onboarding, it's going to be different again. In this example, and certainly in our example at Skore, we need to spend time often with IT during onboarding and a little bit in the sales cycle, but then after that, often there's very little touch points with IT. Unless there's some sort of issue that comes up later on. So understanding who the different contact details are for the different people. Billing information, have you got the right billing information set up? Again, some of this will often get done by procurement pre-sale, but it still might change or need to be clarified at this point. Training, we talked about training here in this process. Who needs to be trained, what level do they need to be trained at? Again, often there's going to be different people require training at different levels. And then related to billing, things like credit checks. So do you need to perform any credit checks at onboarding? Again, hopefully that would often happen in the sales cycle, but not necessarily. It can happen afterwards as well. And then the last 2 points I got, which are often closely related, but also really important, is security. So making sure you got the right security, you understand that the people that you're working with or onboarding are the people that they say they are, is one important thing. And then things like regulatory checks. So for example, anti-money laundering checks. So, first of all, establishing the person you're talking to, is it the right person you're talking to? Are they the real person? And then are there any things that you need to be concerned or aware of in terms of their financial background and so on? And of course, if it's something like employee onboarding, you might have to do legal checks with the police force and all of those sorts of things. So hopefully that gives you a kind of sense of some of the different things that you might need to consider when looking at the onboarding process. So the last thing that I want to go through is could take you through just before I go back up to the top level again, was about sort of ideas for how do you improve or analyze and improve the onboarding process. So starting with this example, just to refresh those of you who are familiar with Skore and to inform those of you if you're new to Skore at all. Again, the most common way to look at or make improvements to a process like this, of course, is mapping the process and discussing it with those involved in the process, and capturing those ideas and challenges and issues. So again, typically we'd use something like the custom field functionality. So during that conversation, if it comes up and it's saying, hey, look, we need to get better at how we understand the data structures that we're capturing from this client, or we need to import from this client. So again, using the attachment panel, I can come and add a custom field. I could capture this as an improvement opportunity if it's the process we've already got and we're already working with. And then in here, I can come in and say, we need to be very clear about the data structure. Excuse my spelling of clear there. And again, as you know, or if you've seen or used Skore before, capturing that custom field against there, we'll save that against that box. I can then easily run a report on that. And so all of the improvements that we might want to look at against this process can be captured that way. Another thing that you might want to consider when you're looking at an onboarding process, or I should say you should definitely consider, is performing some sort of interviews with the people who are being onboarded. So whether it's a customer, an employee, or even a supplier, it's definitely worth trying to interview a selection of those people, either pre-onboarding, during onboarding, and post-onboarding, to get a real sense of how they felt about the experience of going through it, because that will really provide some great insights into things where it might not be working as well as you hope or expect it to be. I know some organizations talk about friction. So what friction is slowing the experience or the process down, or causing people to get frustrated at different points in the process. Now, sort of building on that, if you like, I'll now jump back up to the top and go and show you another example of a different way of looking at a process such as this. So what I'm going to show you in a second, I would still recommend mapping the process out the way that I've just shown you, but from an analysis point of view, creating something like a sort of customer journey, if you like, is often a good way to think about the challenge from the customer's point of view. This would be really useful with any information you might get from interviews, but also to be able to share it with different people within the organization in order to, say, highlight the challenges that the customer's facing, what's impacting them, say, on the onboarding or their particular journey. So here, this is an example of a sort of customer journey map. There's different ways that you can do this. This approach to the customer journey map is about showing the key touch points, if you like, between the customer and all of the other things that your organization does to support them. So often when we look internally at processes, we see nice flowcharts. We don't always think about the fact that the customer is often touching different parts of the organization and therefore having different experience at each one of those points. And this is a nice way to sort of show that. So here in this example, I've got a sort of scenario, if you like, of a customer purchasing a mobile phone, a new phone, so a new device, a contract, and SIM card. And so what we show is what the customer does. They visit the website, they select a device, they select a plan, and then purchase. Alongside that, we're showing what the touch point is. So what is it in our company that the customer's actually interacting with? So in this case, it's a website or online store at this point in the process. But then in the back office section, we can start to show, okay, well, what are the different parts of our organization that are interacting or supporting, ensuring those touch points can exist. Now, again, this is from a loosely based on a real example, one, albeit several years ago. And here what was happening is the customer would go to the website, they'd select their device, select the plan, everything was going really well. You can see that there would be a system would process the payment. That would then interface with an ERP system, which would then process the order internally. And then two things would basically branch off at that point. Setting up the number in the SIM card was happening separately to the device being dispatched. The device was dispatched by actually a third-party organization in this case. The SIM card was sent through the standard postal service, while the third-party service used another third-party courier to deliver the device. And so what would often happen is customer would complete their purchase on the website. They'd get an order confirmation to say, great, order's been done. It will be with you in the next day or two. They'd receive the SIM card the next day or two, and then they'd wait 4 weeks for the device to appear. And so here you can sort of really show in a kind of simple, neat, often impactful way why that's happening and what the experience might feel like to the customer. And then you can use a model like this to either facilitate a conversation with different people across the business about why that's happening and what could be done about it. Just to sort of complete the story, if you like, in this example, what happened is there was no information was sent back from the third-party provider of the physical devices back to the website. So what the solution was to actually push the data back so that you could see when you were on the website looking at your devices, you would get a live view of stock availability, so that users could then make the choice, do I want that device and potentially wait several weeks, or actually do I want to select a different device and know that I'll get it in a few days or whatever it would be. So at that point, I'll sort of stop there. I've sort of given you a few different pointers, a few different ideas of potentially how you can use Skore to capture, understand, and improve onboarding processes. And stop as usual to see if there's any questions or thoughts from the audience.